Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the wonderful world of Mike and Lime. I have the urge to make a number of videos covering a few things. One, because there's a tremendous amount of ignorance out there at the minute. There are a lot of marketing ploys which are not overly agreeable, and I obviously get castigated as well for not telling people enough. So I'm going to try and redress the balance a little bit now. But I think I'll start off with the various some of the various different limes. You have lime hydrate, you have natural hydraulic lime, and the range covers NHL 2, 3.5 and 5. You have quicklime, which might be a CL90, could be a CL80, and you have putty. You can buy your putty pre-mixed with sand and just empty the tub, and away you go as far as plastering and pointing is concerned. You can order it per bulk bag and have tons of the stuff delivered, haired or unhaired, various different grades of and types of sand, various different blends. If decorative effect is your thing. What I want to highlight though is natural hydraulic lime. Here is some, can you just see that there? Right, this is a trusty old favourite. This is St. Astia NHL 2. Now, you say to someone NHL 2, NHL 3.5, NHL 5. They know that there are differences between the three classifications, but we have a terrible system in the UK. I think it's EU legislation basically allows pretty much anything which can be roughly classified as an NHL 3.5 to be acceptable as an NHL 3.5. Now, my experience with natural hydraulic lime dictates that every brand is pretty much different. Otterbein, Crualis, Lafarge, Hansen, Cecil, and the good old trusted St. Astia NHL 3.5. They're all going to be different. They all differ in compressive strength, they all differ in flexural strength, and they all differ in available lime content. Now, for me, doing what I do, I don't build. I point and I plaster, but I do a lot more pointing than I do plastering. So for me, the choice of NHL, if I'm going to use it, is very important. I choose wisely, and I would advise absolutely everybody else to do that. Don't just take anything at face value in the lime industry, because there is a tremendous amount of charlatanry around. Not so much, I should be down in flames for this, but not so much from the manufacturers, but a little bit more so from the suppliers, who should be providing, both the supplier and the manufacturer should be providing more information. So there are two. This NHL comes from basically two different types of rocks. You've got your how do you pronounce it actually? Siliceous. Let's call it siliceous. Siliceous rock, which is a sedimentary rock, and it's formed from sandstone, and that's what St. Astia, Lafarge, and Crualis is from. Cecil, for example, comes from rock beds containing high amounts of clay, so you get a different. Well, they're all they all do the same thing essentially. You can plaster, point, build with them all, but it's horses for courses. Like for me, it's all about the free lime content. If we take this NHL2, That has, I'd say, probably the highest free lime content of all the NHLs. This is 50, it's 50% plus, which in my game, the higher your free lime content, the more breathability. Actually, forget that word breathability. It's more like transpiration. Moisture comes up from the ground. Breathing is this. It's a gaseous exchange. There's no gaseous exchange as far as property is concerned. What we're looking at really is transpiration of moisture. Admittedly, it is to a degree moisture-laden air, but the buildings don't actually breathe per se, but they do transpire moisture, which comes up from the base of the house because they have insubstantial or no foundations. They go directly into the soil. The earth bedding mortar from which they're made does not have any kind of barrier. So there's this sort of osmotic effect where moisture actually gets sucked up from the ground into the wall. So you will always get a moisture content in your property. And any surveyor which comes around with a dampometer and says, "Oh yeah, you need some, you've got a problem with damp," just don't believe them, because it's just rubbish. Because it's just, it's what you would expect in a period property. That doesn't mean to say your house is damp. Far from it. It's operating mechanically, and so the moisture comes up from the ground. But if you have cement render and gypsum plaster, it can't escape into your living room, which effectively is what you want, because it needs to wick away into the atmosphere. And if you've got cement pointing on the outside, it cannot wick away into the atmosphere. It's stuck, turning that earth mortar, that bedding mortar, in your property wetter and wetter and wetter, and this goes higher and higher and higher. Gravity will only have a certain effect. It cannot rise and rise and rise. It will stop about 1.2 meters from the ground. And the damp-proof specialists come around and say, yeah, we need to control that, which is effectively just layer after layer of either tanking or concrete and gypsum plaster, which is porous in the same way a sponge is, in that it will let out some moisture but keep hold of a residual amount. That then rots paintwork. You see it flaking off. You see the yellow plaster behind it, and everybody goes, "Oh, we've got damp. What can we do?" Right. This is what we do. Right. There is no. This is the panacea, pretty much, for all period property ills. This, right, and this. Right, now this is Calvert. It's not my favourite, I must admit, because I think it's brilliant for plastering, because it will stick. It'll stick to anything. But when you point in, and you want a clean finish, in Oxfordshire with this very porous or oolithic stone, it'll stick to it. So there are better options out there. This I brought in because I'm plastering, it has. This is produced in the UK. There are a number of limes which are produced in the UK. You get this, which is I think it's from Buxton, and then you get Singleton Birch Microlime, which comes from a different kind of rock. It comes from chalk. As far as I know, it comes from Lincolnshire, and it's what's called a CL90, which means it's got 90% free lime, which means that this has got a higher free lime content than this. So if you're looking for super breathability, this is what you use. The only difference between that and this is that this is what you would call a dry hydrate, which means that it has been slaked to a degree, and it contains impurities. So if it's got a free lime content, available lime content of 50%, it means that you've got a high amount of impurity in this, but that's what helps it to set. This, on the other hand, 90% available lime, it doesn't have a hydraulic set like this. This goes off through carbonation. Because what happens is, in the case of all limes, the carbon is burnt off during, some of the carbon is burnt off during the kilning process. But when it's hardening, this will obtain a chemical set because of its hydraulicity, which means it will set underwater. This, on the other hand, although it might dry out, actually cures through carbonation, which is the pulling back, the extraction of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, hence the word carbonation. So it's much more environmentally friendly than cement, which incidentally has all of its free lime burnt off during the kilning process, and that's one hell of a lot of carbon to pump into the atmosphere. Cement is a major pollutant in the world. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it pretty much is it's the major pollutant in the world because it's used across the world. Lime gets used a lot as far as restoration is concerned, but we need to really reevaluate what we're doing with the environment. You can forget about car and air pollution. If anything, we should be campaigning for the cessation or the restricted use of cement, simply because it's so dangerous to the environment. And not only that, but once a building gets bulldozed, it just cannot be reused. Whereas if, say, for example, you're knocking down an old wall, a red brick wall, which is, say, double-skinned and 6 or 7 feet high, the lime could effectively be reused. I mean, it's not, but it could be. And the bricks can also be used as well. But when you're bulldozing something which has been built with cement, then you're looking at multiple units which are glued together with stuff which is effectively about as strong as super glue. So, where can I go from here? Right, okay. So, manufacturers just simply do not put any information on their packaging. I mean, they really don't. They could be putting free lime content, they could be which is, I mean, you would expect that. That's the least they could do. I'm what's called a need for cognition person, which basically means if I see an advert and the voiceover says, "Use this, it's great, it smells fantastic," I want to know why. I want to know what makes it smell. I want to know who says it smells fantastic. I want to look at the scientific data. I want to see whether the research is being conducted effectively and honestly. And so what I'm looking for with lime is honesty. And there's very little of that around nowadays. I mean, I respect St. Nasty because at the end of the day, the French are brilliant. Their attitude, I saw it when I used to work. I used to work in hotels and restaurants. I saw it with their wine. Their attitude was, this is our wine, and they just say, "This is our wine. It's fantastic. That's what you want." Whereas, the Chileans, for example, are desperate to market their wines in the UK. The French just kind of say, "This is our wine. Take it or leave it." You drive through the French countryside looking for a restaurant, you won't find one because only the French people know where it is because this is our restaurant. So at the end of the day, this isn't even. I mean, you look at this, le show, l'excellence, right? St. Astia do have a very high opinion of themselves. But who can blame them, because it's not actually a bad line at all. But at the end of the day, they don't even bother writing what's on here in English because they know they don't need to. Because at the end of the day, we as a nation don't really bother so much with St. Astia NHL2. When we should be able to walk into any builder's merchant in the UK and at least get a bag of St. Astia NHL 3.5, at least. But a rarity in the UK. But that said, the free lime content isn't advertised. There's very little information. It's rather like what we've got is a Harley Davidson mentality as far as limes are concerned. I'm in the process of getting rid of one at the minute. I've owned it for about 12 years. Absolutely loved it. But I did find Harley Davidson absolutely astonishing, especially when it came to engine oil, because at the end of the day, a good engine oil is absolutely essential, and you need the right engine oil for the right car, the right bike, the right machine, whatever. Well, what Harley Davidson did is, it was a stroke of marketing genius when they said, when they sold their Harley Davidson motorcycle oil as refinery sealed, as if somehow that makes it better that it was sealed at the refinery and it's a tin and it's got Harley Davidson stamped on it. So you buy the engine oil because you're buying it the Harley Davidson lifestyle, whereas at the end of the day, God did not, lay down that oil well specifically for Harley Davidson to run their engines on it. It's only when you realise that, when you get into it, that you realise a really good semi-synthetic oil is actually better, much better than a genuine refinery sealed Harley Davidson motorcycle oil for twice the price of everything else. But people buy into the lifestyle, they buy into the, hey, it's a Harley Davidson. And, they ask no questions, whereas the first question I ask is, well, where's the refinery? Why is it sealed at the refinery? It's a really thick oil. Why does it need to be that thick? Believe me, in our house over the winter, the long winter nights just fly by, right? Because I'm a questioner. And so, when I came into Lyme, I moved almost seamlessly from landscape gardening into repointing, because I was working with mortar, already had tools, so it was a hop, skip and a jump. But for me, NHL was just NHL. 3.5 was what you used, and that was the end of it, right? But then, you have to start, being me, I have to start asking the questions. And there are a lot of people who ask a lot more questions than me, and they're the ones with the PhDs, and there's some really good ones out there at the minute. But anyway, so what I would encourage you to do before you buy your NHL, before you buy your quicklime, before you buy your lime putty, use that. It's what it's there for. Be a need for cognition kind of person. Question why. And also, if a supplier is selling it, okay, we're all in the business to make a living, right? But if a supplier is selling it, why are they selling it? Are they selling it because it's the best? Or are they selling it because there's a high profit margin? Do they really care about your house? Do they really care about how you put together your mortar? What are the benefits long term of using that NHL 3.5 with, say, for example, a free lime content of around about 20-22% versus a natural hydraulic lime 3.5 with a free lime content of say 44%. If I'm looking at a difference, I should say, in free lime content of 20%, then I'm thinking, okay, so the how come the one with 44% is cheaper than the one with 25% available lime? It's just marketing, and there's no information on it, and suppliers really need to get that message over to people. They can sell. There's a wonderful opportunity now to sell a product. And talking about selling, this is an issue that I want to raise. Cal books, right? Pretty much everybody who has anything to do with the sale of heritage restoration gear will sell Cal books, and everybody recognises it because it's the yellow package, and it stores well because it's not paper. You can have it sitting around for God knows how long. It's might not be airtight, but at the end of the day, you can leave it in a shed over winter and it'll be okay. But anyway, it's a CL90, and so what we have in the UK now is a lot of people who are getting into hotline, because once you add water to this, it'll boil. And it will hit, if you mix it in a certain way, it'll quite happily hit 200-300 degrees. The minimum slaking temperature you need is 100 degrees, because water boils at 100 degrees. So for your hot lime, you're adding sand and lime and water together. You get a chemical reaction, you get an exothermic reaction, and warmth, you get steam, you burn yourself and everything. It's absolutely wonderful stuff. Shove some horsehair and a few extra ingredients, and you've got a mortar which you can use for pointing, plastering and building. It's fantastic, 90% free lime content. It's the most breathable, it's the most porous. You know, it's wonderful stuff. But what we have to do is add pozzolan into it, and what pozzolan will do is effectively eat some of the lime. And what we're looking to do, as masons, is reduce the free lime content by about 10%, effectively taking it down through the use of pozzolan to a CL80, but it's not really a CL80 because it doesn't set as quickly as a CL80. And so I've arrived at the conclusion, something that I've been building up to for a while, to ditch the CL90 because I've experimented with all sorts of different pozzolans, and I mean I really have, and I've looked at how they affect the mortar, I've looked at how they affect the set. I've even tried using NHL, and what I would discourage you whilst I'm at it, hopefully I quite often lose my thread when I'm talking like this. Excuse me if I do, then I apologise, and I'll try and remember that I'm talking about CL80. But ultimately, a lot of people are adding NHL into quicklime, and personally, I don't really think it's a very good practice at all. And it smacks of 1980s and 90s builders shoving cement into NHL. It is really unnecessary. And you see, what you're actually doing is you're taking something which has got a very high free lime content, and you're then adding something which has got a free lime content. So let's say, for example, if I want to add, gauge in some NHL 3.5 St. Astia, what I'm doing is I'm increasing the free lime content of something which has got a high free lime content anyway. And the rationale is that somehow, somewhere, the impurities in the NHL will give this a hydraulic set, and it'll set more quickly. It doesn't work that way. What actually happens is you increase the free lime content. You are then adding a hydraulic element to it, which reduces the free lime content. But because it's a very high free lime content mortar in the first place, the impurities, the hydraulic impurities in the NHL, do not create a hydraulic set for, in optimum laboratory conditions, 2 years. Okay, so for me personally, it's a futile. To me, it's a lazy man's way of working. If you want to introduce a hydraulic element to your CL90, then get some pulverized fuel ash. Buy some brick dust. Use some wood ash. There are so many different pozzolans out there. There's trash, there's ground granulated blast furnace slag. There are so many additions that you could include in your mix. But my advice is not to increase the free lime content with natural hydraulic lime. And I know this is a thing in Scotland, because people are worried that somehow the weather's going to have this detrimental effect, and their hot lime's going to be ruined. Consider this, okay? 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago, did they have natural hydraulic lime? No. And so all they do is they introduce a hydraulic element to the pozzolan, to the mortar by adding a pozzolan. And what you can actually do is you can totally dispense with sand. If you really do want a rock hard mortar that's going to sit underground, then you still use this, but all you do is you completely dispense with the sand. And you just use 100% pozzolan, because that will set like granite if that's what you need it to do. So rather than just jump on the bandwagon and just think, well, everybody's using NHL in a CL90. I would encourage suppliers to think, because there's a massive market. It's just waiting to be tapped. Anybody who gets into CL80 and markets it properly, just presents it properly, has an absolute shed load of masons who've been adding pozzolans to CL90, Sell them CL80, they don't have to do that anymore, and not only that, but they'll get a bit of a better set. When I'm using Otterbein, and I'll say this, Otterbein, I don't usually give much of what I do away, right? And the reason for that is because, you know, I like earning a living from it. I don't want everybody else in Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire, Northamptonshire and Buckinghamshire using my methods, okay? Maybe one day when I retire and I write a book or do more of these videos, then yeah, but not now. But what I will do is I'll say, absolutely demand from your supplier Otterbein CL80. I've pretty much switched over to it. I'm only using this for a bit of plastering, but for me it's Otterbein CL80, and the reason for that is because, and I'm working on this at the minute, I'll do another video at some point down the line to tell you whether it actually has a hydraulic set. I'm actually working with just me and Declan Reid from Chalk Down Line. We're having a conversation. I was just about to be Poncy there and just say I'm working in collaboration with, but you know, let's dispense with that. Me and Declan were having a chat the other day, and he said, get some of your pug, stick it in a jam jar or bucket or something, give it a couple of weeks, see if it goes off, because you know, it's interesting to us to discover whether or not it does actually have a hydraulic set. If it does, it'll set underwater. So anyway, you know, and a word to the architects and the surveyors. Now, I'm fed up with reading surveys where a surveyor says, we recommend repointing with lime. Really? Well, that's rather like saying go to a supermarket and buy some tea. That's rather like saying go to a tyre bay and buy some tyres. It's rather like going to a Starbucks and just saying, I'd like some coffee, please. Coffee is not coffee is not coffee, right? Tea, millions of blends, you know, many different countries doing various different teas. So, and tyres, I mean, you know, do you want fuel economy? Do you want wet weather handling ability? Do you want better braking? Do you want your tyres to be hard wearing? You know, are you willing to make some sacrifices here and there? You know, do you want all terrains, mud terrains, road tyres? Do you want winter tyres? Do you want tyres for ice and snow? Do you want muddy? You know, the list just goes on, and it's exactly the same with lime. So when you're advising a client, I actually had a wonderful solicitor? No, surveyor. I hope I do get a wonderful solicitor at some point. He advised his clients to seek out somebody who worked with hot lime in Oxfordshire, and luckily it was me, and I did his job. It was a lovely job, and now he said solicitor again, that's a Freudian slip. The surveyor understood perfectly that a chemical reaction occurs between cement and stone. Basically, what cement will do is between the minute gap, the minuscule void between the cement mortar and the stone or the brick, you can get moisture, and as soon as you get moisture, what you get is rot, because the stone and the cement in the presence of moisture will rot the stone. Right? The cement won't get rotten because that's just rock hard. But because the stone is porous, right, it'll rot. My God, I tell you what, the work I had to do on coins, which somebody had pointed up with cement, it was just days. You know, but the cost of replacing the coins far out was massive in comparison to some to the repairs. So we repaired, but I just thought to myself, you know, people, again, it's this lack of thought. You know, let's just knock up your muck, bang it in, pan it on, lay it on. You know, no thought. And so, you know, what's actually happened? I mean, it's great for me because, you know, people have got such messed up houses nowadays that you know, it's actually impossible not to make a living in heritage restoration at the moment. But we do actually need to, think about how we approach things. I'll give you a wonderful example. Lime wash. Basically, what lime wash is if you get a bucket of water, not plastic because it'll melt it. You get a rubber truck, and you just keep on adding this to water. It'll boil, right? You chuck another trowelful, spoonful, whatever else in, you'll get a volcanic sort of exothermic reaction as it fizzes, right? And then you can paint it onto your wall. That's lime wash, right? That's hot lime wash. It's completely unadulterated, and it's out of fashion nowadays because people like to see exposed stone and brick. Without understanding that exposed stone and brick actually needs to be covered. The whole concept of uncovered brick and stone to masons from the 16 and 1700s would have just they would look for the quicklime because they need to start covering up the brick and stone, because it's all about basically poulticing your property. Poultice it from the outside and inside, so you've got lime render, lime plaster, lime wash, and lime pointing, and ultimately, if you're going to use lime wash, there's a trend at the moment to use this. Basically, it's lime putty, and it's just been watered down. Got maybe a bit of pigment in it, and linseed oil. And I was listening to Nigel Copsey's monologue the other night. Absolutely wonderful, absolutely fantastic. It's epic. It's a fairly lengthy one, and hat off to Nigel for going for it as far as that's concerned. But we owe Nigel a debt of gratitude, and his colleagues, because they have really done some work as far as creating a greater understanding of what our heritage restoration. They're creating a greater understanding of the mistakes everybody made in the 80s and 90s concerning heritage restoration. We're starting out and do those mistakes now, But anyway, and he was just saying, couldn't believe it. He was manufacturers and suppliers are producing and selling lime wash with the addition of linseed oil. And what linseed oil will do, if you add it to a mortar or a lime wash, it'll toughen it up. That's fine if you're going to be doing, say for example, some chimney pointing and you want to use some CL90. Put pozzolan in it, and chuck a bit of linseed oil in it, and you've got a tough mortar which will still remain, which has its breathability reduced, its permeability reduced, and it will be able to withstand the elements for decades to come. But putting it on a lime wash, and like Nigel says, that's the last coat of lime wash you're putting on that building, because it might as well be. It's to stop it wearing. It's to stop it weathering. But the whole point of all these, heritage materials is that they do wear. You want them to wear. You need lime wash to wear away. Because that indicates then that it's doing its job, because it's the sacrificial element and not the brick or the stone. It's not just about the mortar and the joints and showing off a nice bit of stonework or brickwork. It's protecting it, and a lime wash effectively will stop the ingress of moisture, because it'll pull it out the atmosphere and it'll hold it, and then when it warms up it'll let it go. It's like internal plaster and what they call breathable paint. Condensation gets pulled, moisture gets pulled out of the your internal living environment. It's then held, and then it's rather like, it's a bit like, I equate it, I don't know how right I am, but I equate it to dew fall. And then when the property warms up, it'll let it out into the atmosphere. It'll let the moisture out into the atmosphere. So, but yeah, I mean, the manufacturers are manufacturing cold lime wash with linseed oil, because they know that it's Nat's pee basically. It's just watered down lime putty, and so you've got to slap loads of coats on it, whereas effectively a good boiling hot lime wash going on the outside of your property will poultice it, and it will increase permeability, porosity. But you know, the days of work. But it's a dangerous material. You know, it can blind you, and it can scald you. And the thing is, the manufacturers and the suppliers. We take, for example, the sheds. You know what we're looking at, B&Q, Sainsbury's Home Base. I don't think it exists anymore, does it? You know, and Wicks and all the rest of them. They're more than happy to sell you non-breathable masonry paints, completely waterproofing and sealing your house. The trend of for the DIY trend, basically the last of the true painters and decorators made their exit when in the I don't know, there were far fewer of them around in the 1970s, because you know, everybody could go down the DIY shop and get everything that they needed. The only problem is all those DIY interventions have now effectively acted like the chickens who have come home to roost. So you know, I'm not trying to promote the use of trades more than they should be promoted, but at the end of the day, you know, if you spent 10 years learning all about painting and decorating or plastering, or become you know, and you can run a mould, and you know, work with plaster of Paris and all the rest of it, that is to be respected. You know, I wish I could. I'm just a bog standard sort of, like, you know, slap your lime mortar on the wall and see if I can get a nice skim coat. There are guys out there who've been who really know their work as far as heritage restoration is concerned. So you know, if you're thinking about just buying a consignment of lime wash with the linseed oil, think again, because you know, who's doing you a favour? So anyway, I'm gonna. There is just one last thing I'll do, and this is gonna be. I tell you what, I'll be in competition with Nigel as far as this is concerned. Now I must actually get on and do some work, because you know, this is eating into my day. I've got some lime putty here. Right now, I'm going to show you something. Lime putty is absolutely fantastic as long as it's kept airtight. Now, this is an old tub. It's been sitting around for God knows how long. It's got a damaged lid, and I can actually poke a trowel through it. A fracture, you know, but enough to reduce its air tightness. So this is the lime putty, right? It's going back to what it actually looked like. Because when you see a piece of quicklime, a lump of burnt rock, it's white, and you add water to it, and it all starts to flake and what have you. So that's now what we call carbonating, which means that it's, I mean, you know, it's only half a tub, which I'm sitting around for repairs, you know. It's time for it to go in the bin. But I just show you what actually happens. You know, when I do this to it, it's actually starting to delaminate. You know, so would I use this for anything? No, not really. You know, like I say, it's half a tub. It served me well. It's had a hole in the lid for God knows how long. It's been sitting around in one of my stores. And so, you know, it's time for it to go in the bin, because effectively, as it's begun to carbonate, it's lost its ability to really do what I want it to do. You know, so you know, it can go on the garden now. And so anyway, yeah. So if you're buying, I mean, this has a shelf life. This Calbux also has a shelf life, because you know, eventually it will sit around for long enough to effectively, you know, lose its potency. But lime, once it's run to a putty, basically once you take your quicklime powder or kibble, lump lime, whatever, and turn it to putty. As long as it's sealed, it doesn't make any difference whether you've added sand. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a mortar or whether it's just a putty. It can just sit there for God knows how long. And what actually happens is the longer you leave a putty, this is why, and if this is another thing about suppliers, right? They sell putty as mature putty, and for me, mature putty is a year old. I mean, yeah, I know. Okay, you've got to have it sitting around on your premises for a lot longer. But wouldn't it be nice to have a choice of maybe sort of the average mature putty is between 4 and 6 months old? Wouldn't it be nice to have the choice of a putty that would say, a minimum of 12 months old? Because what actually happens is you leave a putty maturing, and it will just continue to break down. It'll become smoother and smoother and smoother and smoother. So if you're going to say for a skin, for example, and you're using a putty which is, I mean, you've got to be a sort of fairly adept and skillful plasterer to notice the difference between a putty which is 4 months old and a putty which is, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. I keep putty stored, and I've got some now which is, when did I store it? Was using it 2019, I think. 2018. It might even be. I think I've got some going back to 2017. So all in all, my putty's at least 3 years old, and I like to have a choice because. But I won't bore you too much with the ins and outs of mature lime putty, but I will tell you this, that it was a particular king of England, can't remember what it was, and if he found out a mason was using putty that was less than 40 years old, that mason would lose his hands, and that's kind of quite scary, anyway, I think I'm sort of winding up now. We've done a bit on natural hydraulic lime. Oh, just one more thing. Lime hydrate, otherwise known as hydrated lime. You buy it in the builders' merchants, and you can actually make a mortar out of it. And it's now been relegated to the realms of plasticizer for bricklaying mortar, because it actually does work as a plasticizer. But what happens is the cement is so strong that it just sets all the qualities in the lime. So it makes your mortar more workable, so you can get it down on your brick, and you can lay brick on this soft, fluffy bed of mortar. But you can actually use it. You can actually use hydrated lime. I buy it, I use it. That's one of those things I can't tell you exactly why I use it just yet, but give me a bit of time and I will eventually divulge. If you're going to use lime hydrate, i.e., your ordinary bog standard, what you would call builder's lime, which, like I say, has been relegated to a plasticizer, you can use it to make a formidable mortar, because what it is basically, it's this, which has had its, which has been changed slightly, it's a CL90, so it's extremely high in free lime. So if you add, say, I'd go say 1 to 2, 1 to 2.5, you will get a plastering mortar, you will get a skimming mortar, you will get a building mortar, a pointing mortar, whatever, but only if it is fresh. I'd say no older than a couple of weeks. You want it fresh out the factory gates if you can, or if it's coming on a pallet to the builders merchants, then you use it with impunity. But don't think about storing it for 6 months. Don't put it aside for 6 months, because what happens is it will become inert, which means that it will, as it sits in its packaging, it will carbonate, and the result will be that you may as well use flour. You may as well add flour to your sand, because it will be that effective. You know, it will not set, it will not carbonate, it won't cure, nothing. It's basically when the apprentice bricklayers are at college, you can't give them sand and cement to work with, because the cement will set. So basically what you do is they use inert lime hydrate and sand, and then when they're finished with it, they just chuck it back in the pan mixer and add a bit of water to it when they're ready to go again, and they'll just keep using that throughout the term, and then just maybe chuck it away, get some fresh out for the following term. Lime hydrate, because some people say to me, Mike, what's best? But they don't actually say that. They can run it up and think, Mike, but no. Anyway, look, I've ruined it there just towards the end of the video, completely ruined it. Right, anyway, yeah. No, actually people do. They come up to me and they just say, what do you recommend, Mike? Lime hydrate or NHL? And for the sake of the customer and for their sanity, I'll just say, stick with your NHL. You know, and I know fine well that they're just going to go off blindly to a builder's merchant and go, NHL, fantastic, how much is that? I'll buy that. Off they go, look on the internet, and they mix it 1 to 3, which isn't necessarily good, because, you know, the more sand you put in it, the weaker it becomes. You know, so and this is another thing as well. You know, if you're going to be using, say, high free lime content NHL, then you might not want to use the same sand ratio as if you were using a low free lime content NHL. You know, you can use, depending on the situation, depending on your NHL, you can go 1 to 2, 1 to 2.5, 1 to 3. With quicklime, you can go maximum 1 to 4. So effectively, it works out to be more economical, and you also get a slight increase in volume, because quicklime will expand only marginally as far as the powder is concerned. But when you're using lump lime, it can actually expand to twice the volume. Right, okay. I think that just about does it. I'm going to do a few more videos like this as time goes by, and you know, what I'm hoping to do is just raise people's awareness as far as you know, the lime industry is concerned, the lack of information which is out there, the occasional charlatanry. I mean, I speak to masons who've been doing it for a long time, and you know, a lot of them you know, they have their pet hates. As far as it's just like me with the calbugs. You know, nothing wrong with calbugs, it's fine. But do I like using it on pointing? No. Would I recommend other people don't use it on pointing? No. You know, and then of course you've got your sands. You know, various different sands. What I can tell you is this, right? When you're using NHL, right, never ever use building sand, because building sand only became actually acceptable. It only became acceptable through the use of cement, because it's unwashed. Basically, for back in the day, all plastering sand was dragged from a riverbed, because it had been washed, and so you wouldn't get any impurities coming up, coming out. If you use building sand with an NHL, all the disgusting impurities, which were usually set solid with cement, will come out, and sometimes it comes out as, you know, areas of what looking like oily residue. It's usually at the base. You know, building sand and lime is fine round about gutter level, because, you know, you've got hot air risers, you know, so everything at the further up a property will dry out more quickly. You do have a certain amount of drain down, but ultimately, when you're repointing the base of a property, it's a lot slower to go off at the base. And what you do is you get the moisture will creep up from the soil, from the ground, into the mortar, and as it comes through, it will bring all the impurities with it. Because it's a porous mortar. So, you know, use building sand at your peril. In addition, bear in mind that a decent river sand will be quite angular, and so, you know, your binder, as in your lime, will bind the particles together so you get a strong weather resistant mortar. You also get a decent porous mortar. But when you go down the route of building sand, it's not a particularly, I mean, okay, you get a blend of maybe sort of like 60-40 fines and sharps, but you'll discover that a lot of the sharp, because it's manufactured, it's not actually as sharp as it could be. There are lots of round grains, and round grains don't hang together. I mean, and then of course you've got your finer grains, and they're not necessarily. So if you grab a handful of builder's sand and you go like that, it's not going to hurt you. I mean, you will eventually wear your fingers away, but there are other sands out there that we use for pointing and plastering. Whereas you don't want to be doing that for very long, because they're very angular grains. It is effectively sharp. But anyway, I'm really going to leave it there and get on with the day, because God Almighty, how long is this video? I think it's the longest one I've ever done. But anyway, thanks ever so much.